Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. So before we get into this next segment, I want to play a song. Take a listen. It's called As the Silence Falls, and it's by The Velvet Sundown. The band's music has garnered a lot of attention recently. Their other song, Dust on the Wind, has about 2 million Spotify streams. And as of this morning, the group has just under 1.5 million monthly listeners on the app. But their fans won't be seeing them in concert anytime soon. In fact, they may never get to see the band in person. And that's because that soft indie rock sound you just heard is completely synthetic. The drums, the guitar, and the voice were all made with AI. It was generated by the program Suno. And it's an example of how AI is causing a stir within the music industry. If anyone can generate an entire song or album like this, what does it mean for the artists and musicians who do create music from scratch for a living? Last year, a collective of artists, musicians, and producers from across the music industry raised their concerns about AI in an open letter calling unchecked AI, or the predatory use of AI, quote, an assault on human creativity. And over 200 artists signed the letter, including Billie Eilish and Smokey Robinson. A major name missing from that list is rapper and producer Timbaland. He's known for making iconic beats over the last few decades for major artists like Aaliyah, Missy Elliott, and Justin Timberlake. He went the opposite direction, and he's embracing AI by partnering with Suno to launch an AI entertainment company and release new music with AI musicians. So is there an opportunity for a new revolution in music? And how big of a threat is AI to the music industry? Jeremy Peters is a professor of music business at Wayne State University. His work centers around arts entrepreneurship, among many other subjects, and he has experience working in music publishing. And he joins me now in the studio. Professor Peters, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
So you heard that song, and I'm sure you're already a little familiar with The Velvet Sundown. When you first heard AI-generated music, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, that particular example, I listened to it, tried to put out a side of my mind that I knew that was an AI-generated song. I was like, that's kind of interesting. It sort of riffs on some themes. I could maybe like that song. And as you mentioned, it's got over 1 million monthly listeners now. When all the news came out, it was only 500,000 monthly listeners. So it's actually grown because of the popularity. It sounds somewhat realistic, and it's hard to tell whether or not people are involved in the making of that process. And I find that kind of fascinating and kind of scary at the same time.
Yeah, that we were in here. Well, I had my eyes on my computer screen, but I was in here kind of, rocking my head back and forth when I first heard that song. I was like, this sounds good. It sounds good. But then you realize, like, okay, there was no person on the drums. There was no person on the guitar making it. And I go, okay, where do we sit in how much we want to appreciate this music? Because if they're making it and people are listening to it, I imagine people would make more of it.
Yeah, I think people will continue to create more of it, especially as the tools get better and better and better. The fact that there's no human who's gone through the woodshedding process, who's come up learning drums, learning guitar, learning trombone. I was a trombonist and a singer myself, coming up, taking all those lessons. It feels like a slight sometimes to the musician side of me, but I also feel like the creation of that kind of music maybe is a way for people to sort of maybe it's a back door for folks who don't have access to that kind of musical training to get into learning about music, to start learning about beat making, to start, well, this guitar sounds cool. How do I actually do that on an instrument? That I find kind of interesting.
What you're describing too, beat making, kind of finding your way into music, there are technologies that have existed that, the person who made the song, that produces all the time. I mentioned Timbaland. He didn't play all the instruments on all the songs that he produced. There's been a time where technology has made making music a lot simpler. Can you just talk through, I guess, what tools kind of have existed before generative AI came along and how they've helped producers and songwriters really make music, and they're not always the actual instrumentalist?
Yeah, sure. In I guess in a short format, we have like the synthesizer replicating traditional instruments like flutes and trombones and other sorts of sounds as a digital synthesis of that. And that's sort of one aspect of it. You have the drum machine, the classic 808, that the foundation of Detroit techno, as a replication of real drumming that's doing it on a computer's like a locked process. And then you have the MPC, Akai MPC sampler, our hometown hero, Jay Dilla.
Squad.
Exactly. Which he sort of brought this new sense of time and format to it, learning how to play that instrument and sampling from pre-existing drum sounds and making those into a new format of time. And so the use of technology to inform music making, to help music making, has sort of pre-existed. I think the shift with AI is where you are taking some of the maybe knob twiddling out of the process, and it's doing a lot of the work for you. You're putting in an entry, you're putting in text into a box, and it's replicating or pushing out something for you. It's interesting in terms of the idea of being able to maybe riff on songwriting, to come up with ideas, to explore things. But when you're generating something completely in the box, I think maybe that's where it gets to feel a little weird as a musician or a music scholar. But I have to say that I was just at a conference in France, the International Association of Popular Music, the study of popular music, and there were 20 or 30 papers out of the 400 that were on AI music generation and AI tools. So it's a topic that we've been discussing and sort of hashing out.
Hashing out in what way? Are you trying to figure out how to use it best? Like, what does that look like? Is it, how do we regulate it? How do we make sure it's fair?
I think it's all of that.
Okay.
There's questions about the ethics in terms of it. There's questions around the copyright and copyright infringement and whether or not you can even copyright this AI-generated music. The Copyright Office just came out with some publications and statements and rulings saying that there has to be significant human creativity involved for something to be copyrightable. So whether or not we can even register those songs and quote unquote own those songs is up into question.
The AI generated songs.
Yeah, the AI generated songs is into question, especially if it's just something that you're typing in and putting out. And the same applies for visual art and so on and so forth.
So I want to.
Sure.
Oh, did you have more you wanted to share about the conference?
No.
I wanted to go to the point you made about folks who have been in the woodshed. As a fellow trombonist for 10 years, we know what it's like to be in the practice room, to have sore lips. If you're a violinist, sore fingers, guitar, sore fingers. If the drummer, I'm sure your elbows are aching. Like, there are long hours you have to put in to be able to execute some really cool and dope beats. Now, of course, you mentioned the technology that has come across our tables and influenced the way people make beats already. And so there's already kind of been people like, man, people are making these beats that I can't even drum. But I'm wondering, like, does that take the artistry out of it? It's a little bit of a distance when you're making a completely generated song and you haven't, had the sore elbows or the sore lips or the sore fingers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sense of being in it and really having your mind completely focused in the space. Sometimes you talk to musicians, especially if they're electronic musicians and they're working on a computer screen. They can't see the forest for the trees. They spend like hours working on like 2 seconds of a song.
The
same
mix.
thing. Yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing. It's like, oh man, I can't get that riff. So I sit there and I sit in my basement and play that guitar riff. When I was teaching myself guitar, trying to play along with the Weezer album, I was like, why can't I figure this out? I have to figure this out. And and a lot of that's gone. So I feel like the passion and the hard work, that's why it feels like it's a little bit of a slight when someone else or when someone might just be able to create something really easily. What fascinates me most, I guess, is when we aren't just when folks aren't putting up deep fakes, when folks aren't putting up songs that are just kind of created immediately out of the AI system and just putting that up, but when they're using it to use that as a starting space, or actually using instruments that have AI involved with them that you have to play by hand, that are feeding back with your own sort of musical, your own musical input. There's a Icelandic cello that was used, or instrument based on a cello that was used in the score for Joker, for instance, called the Haldoraphone, which is a resonating, feedbacking cello that uses AI and machine learning to create the sounds, and you can play with it and change with it. And there's examples of live coding using music AI generation, where people are live creating music using these things. And the same has happened in visual art too. An artist named Su-Gwen Chung has programmed with machine learning a robotic arm to draw with her. And it feeds back with the input immediately. That stuff I find absolutely fascinating and super artistic. And that's where I don't think there's quite as much of an ethical concern. It's where you're putting stuff into a system, you're typing into a chat box, and it's, maybe misrepresenting communities of color and their musical traditions, those ethical issues, the questions surrounding all of the data that these sites have hoovered up, whether or not it's licensed. Some are licensed, some are not. That's been fascinating. And to see sort of the pushback from the industry, but also to see how little we've gained in the process of pushing back on the infringement that's going on there.
Yeah, pushback meaning like the lawsuits.
The lawsuits. I mean, there's lots in process. The law moves a lot slower in general than technology does, and so we're always playing catch up. But it's been interesting to watch as sort of a outsider looking at what this is doing to the industry. Obviously, people are engaging with it. You mentioned Timbaland's Stage Zero label. And there's tons of examples, probably more examples than we even know are happening using this. And it's definitely shifting the landscape for creators and musicians.
Absolutely. For those just joining us, you're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. My guest is Professor Jeremy Peters. He is a professor of music business at Wayne State University, and we're discussing how AI-generated music could impact the music industry. The last point I want to go to before we kind of get into the business elements of this, because we only got a few more minutes. We only have so much time.
Yeah.
But it's about what's the goal here. And I know you've kind of already talked about your stance here. You're separating using technology to elevate your ability to explore different music and different sounds. You're separating that from creating a completely different song with very little effort by just putting in some code and making some generic song. But I do wonder, as we see songs like this being created and bands like the Velvet Sundown being created, what the goal is. And, coming from a musical background, this is just my perception, is that, artistry there's a process, right? There's an idea or an imagination in your head of something you want to create. Then you develop the skills to create it. And then it becomes a reality. And then there's like a sense of accomplishment on the other end, right? When you're a very established musician or you're an amazing producer. And if you have this program that, I guess, shortens that process, what is that initial actor anymore? Are they still an artist?
I think in some ways they are, but they are using technology in a different way. The reason or the example I might use to, I don't want to say challenge, but to discuss this with you is the typewriter. So a writer that's going through a process, that's writing on a typewriter, making edits, it's very difficult. You're typing things. There's no backspace. There's no delete. There's no copy paste. That structure is a little bit more, I guess, analog by nature versus a word processor where you can change around. You're still writing and creating there, and it's a lot easier to create and to change what you're doing with. This is similarly a tool that people are using to shorten some of the process. Maybe it's not a perfect analogy because the process is much, 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 much shorter when you're just typing into an AI box in Suno and getting out a song that sounds relatively like, let's say, a female singer-songwriter with long blonde hair that sings in a semi-country fashion. You can probably guess that I'm sort of mentioning maybe Taylor Swift or something like that.
Right.
You can sort of fake your way into getting a song like that. And I actually have my students do that in class. I have assigned them to make an AI song and then to discuss some of the ethical issues, the copyright issues, and the sonic issues involved. That process seems really easy, and I think you're right to say that that musicians often feel slighted because that process is shortened. But I guess I kind of sit in between the standpoint of that being problematic or that being beneficial, because I feel like I see
there's an opportunity.
There's an opportunity to be had there to create maybe folks that are engaging with music more than just as a listener. They feel like they can create, and maybe they get into more forms of creation there. Maybe that's a highly pie in the sky positive view, but
sure.
I like to think that that possibility exists.
I do want to get to some of the quick business things. We've got like a little under 5 minutes where we can talk about this. Last year, the nonprofit Artists' Rights Alliance issued an open letter asking tech companies and AI developers and streaming services not to replace artistry or deny artists fair compensation for their work. I just want to know, like, can we talk about the impact that this could have for songwriters and artists who may not be the Taylor Swifts, who may not be the Billie Eilishes, who make and write songs, but now they've got major labels, major artists might have tools that can essentially do the job that they do.
Yeah, there's been a lot of stories, for example, about AI-generated music on playlists on Spotify, for example, and the way that royalties are generated. Mm-hmm. It's generated based off of a prorated percentage, of the monthly listens. And so if an AI-generated bot, let's say, or AI-generated music that, let's say, Spotify or another company that they hire is creating, beats to study to, and that's the first 10 songs on that playlist, and you only get through those 10 songs, they don't have to pay out royalties for those, and that depresses the amount of royalties that are paid out to everybody else. And as that becomes more and more difficult, as hundreds of thousands of songs are uploaded week by week onto these services, it becomes much more difficult to find people's music. You have to really work to create a connection with an audience base. That sort of passive listening sort of possibility to be found randomly feels like it is less likely to happen for those artists. And I think that's probably really scary and something that's to be concerned with. And I agree with the statement that was put out in relation to that. I think that labeling needs to happen. I think that as much effort that has gone into creating AI music and be making that easy to create and easy to put up, as much effort technologically needs to be put into maybe ways to find and tag these pieces of art so that at least the listener and the consumer is more aware and they can make an educated choice.
Who made this? What if record labels, major record labels, and AI companies came together and agreed on a licensing contract? How would that impact artists?
I think it could impact the creators. So there are a couple of AI-generated music systems that have licensed the content in from a couple labels, and I think that's a really promising step forward. Ultimately, for that to really happen across the board, we're going to have some sort of federal legislation, and it's always difficult for that to happen. You know, the common phrase, Congress is the opposite of progress.
Right.
That I don't know if that will happen if we're being realistic. But if we could come to some sort of agreement across the industry, whether that's through the digital services and the RIAA and all the indies coming together and saying, okay, here's our stance, here's our agreement on this, here's how we might be able to go forward, maybe that's a step in the right direction. But I think it's going to take some sort of big force to push us all into the room to make something like that happen. And until then, we have to keep doing the publicity campaigns, the Artists' Rights Alliance and Songwriters Alliance and all those other groups have pushed forward to try to reach public awareness. Because, for instance, the news article about Velvet Sundown was all over the place,
right,
and made a lot more people at least aware that this is happening.
Yeah, I see. Well, Professor Jeremy Peters, I appreciate your insight. That's helpful to know the business side, the creative side of what's going on here, and we'll follow it closely. Professor Jeremy Peters is a professor of music business at Wayne State University, and he just came and laid down the rules of how AI and business all is working out right now.
It'll probably
industry.
Change by tomorrow.
Facts. Very true. Stay right there. We'll be right back on the Metro to remind you all how to support local radio and public media.